All right. Well, we're in on page 138 in the Gospel. We're in the chapter The Master in Keshab. And we just read a little song that Sri Ramakrishna sang. He had just become intoxicated with divine love and sang, "If I can only pass away repeating Durga's name, how can you then, O Blessed One, withhold from me deliverance, wretched though I may be?" That's a beautiful prayer. Wretched though I may be. That it really demonstrates to us that it's the name that separates us from our wretchedness. You know, to play along, I might drive this pole all the way into the ground, but this idea of that silent mind, that is the arrival of full grace, is having that silent mind. And in that silence, there are no samskaras. The samskaras of the past are erased. You're sitting in pure grace because you're purely in the presence of the beloved in that silence, without any thought in mind. And in that silence, without mind of the distraction, you become fully aware of your true nature, because nothing outside, or no that you assume from outside, is telling you anything anymore. There's only that silence of being, and in that you know what you are. It's plain and obvious to you, and that silence is the I am. It is God. And so to just simply to still the mind is 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 what we're trying to do. And the name of Durga, the God's name, is what puts up that wall to allow the silence to begin. Because you occupy the mind with the name of the beloved, and that infers the form. And what is the form? The form is the silent, unchanging absolute. And so you become witness to that. Uh, of course, ultimately, initially you're witness to it because Mother keeps a little bit of ego in us to enjoy the sugar for a while. And then she removes even that sense of I, and then you become love itself. And what happens after that's indescribable. So he's saying, if only I can pass away repeating Durga's name. And this passing away may or may not be the physical passing away of the body. I like to think of it in a more spiritual interpretation, that this passing away is the death of the ego when the mind goes completely silent. There is no longer any sustaining ignorance to maintain the sense of separateness from the beloved. And so, passing away, chanting Durga's name is a double meaning, to those of us not quite in that space, it means to die, for the body to die while we're repeating the name of God, which is often spoken about. But for someone who's deeply into their practice, it could certainly mean the letting go of all of your own story, all of your own hopes, dreams, ideas, everything that you have cherished in ignorance, the ignorance that we cherish that has kept us from becoming aware of our nature, because we're in the world of the changing, we're in the mind, and we're letting the mind tell us everything, define everything. And the problem with that is that the vrittis of the mind are what are the ego. The summation of those vrittis, of those waves in the mind, is ego. And so when that mind calms through the name, and then finally through the withdrawal of your interest in your ignorance, you sit in that silence in oneness, outside of time, because without thought, there is no time. Without thought, there is no cause and effect. Without thought, there is infinity, immensity, and love itself becomes the experience. And so he's singing that. If only I can pass away, repeating Durga's name, how can you then, O Blessed One, withhold from me deliverance, though wretched I may be? That there is no longer the wall separating you from God, the wall of noise, the active mind, the impure mind. Although I've started to not like calling it the impure mind, because active mind and Shakti are one. And so impure has a bad connotation to me. It just means active mind, the mind of the power, the mind of change, the changing mind. And so we separate from that. We give up our holding on and become aware of ourselves. Then he said to my divine mother, I prayed only for pure love. I offered flowers at her lotus feet and prayed to her, Mother, here is your virtue. Here is your vice. Oops, I haven't pinned. Here is your virtue. Here is your vice. Take them both and grant me only pure love for you. Here is your knowledge and here is your ignorance. Take them both and grant me only pure love for you. Here is your purity. Here is your impurity. Take them both, Mother, and grant me only pure love for you. Here is your dharma. Here is your adharma. Take them both, Mother, and grant me only pure love for you. Here is exactly, wow. I mean, once we start looking at it from this angle, it really blossoms. It really comes right on open, because what's he praying for? What are these opposites? These opposites only appear when we're engaged in active mind because of ego. Ego is a particular, so it can only see one perspective. It doesn't see the universal, and we in our nature are universal. And so when we're trapped in that ego, there's a light and dark, there's a good and a bad, there's a right and a wrong, there's all of these pairs of opposites. And so he's praying here that these pairs of opposites cease, that the vrittis in the mind, the waves of the mind, cease. And in that cessation, he's praying for that pure love, that which remains when the mind is absolutely still and absolutely silent. And that ego self, the creator of duality, right? And why does the ego create duality? Because it's a sense of self that's separate from the divine. You see, you create duality within yourself. You haven't become one person. That's why you have a thinker and a listener within your mind. That's when you're sitting there thinking and you're going through thinking about stuff. Should I go shopping or shouldn't I go shopping? Well, if I go shopping, I can do this. Well, but I don't need that. And so you become two things. You break yourself into two internally. And the initial break is from the divine, from your own self. So you're no longer one self. And we've talked about that in the past, that interesting thing that there's really no use to the active mind for us. In that sense, when you sit there and are thinking to yourself, who is thinking and who is listening? And since you are both the thinker and the listener, what are you telling yourself that you don't already know? Do you see the delusion? This is why it's ignorance. When you sit there and are thinking in your mind, who are you talking to? You're talking to the same person who's thinking. And so when we allow that to go on, when we allow that idea of self to continue, that egoistic particularism, I'll call it, then the world appears. This duality appears. And so we have the inside and the outside. We have the talker and the listener, and all of the dual throng thrives. And here he just goes through and takes all of them and says, Mother, I don't want any more of this turmoil inside, of this noise of the ego, this disruption that the ego is causing in pure mind. The ego does that with those two fingers of me and mine, right? Because of that duality, it becomes concerned about itself. Why? Because there's fear now. When there's the sense of other, there's automatically fear because you don't know the other. And so that fear becomes the driving force, and that is the results of that fear are our vice. We start grabbing at things in the changing world because that's what we're identified with now. We start grabbing things in the changing world to protect us, be it wealth, be it popularity, be it connection with others, be it friendship, be it family. This is where we look for our security. This is where we look for our strength. This is where we look for our identity. I'm a rich man. I'm a popular man. I'm a handsome man or woman. And as long as we go to the changing world for any of those things, we suffer because they cannot last. They cannot touch us even. A thought is not real. That's why Thakur says you can sit there and say, marijuana, 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 all you want. You're not going to get high. He actually says what, ganja or something. But it's he's saying that the answer doesn't lie up here. It's not a matter of thinking and arriving at a conclusion that's going to present us with truth, with enlightenment. The truth is self-evident. We simply have to become aware of it. We simply have to see it. You know, same instruction from Vivekananda, which we hit all the time. I've got to come up with some new examples, but they're so good. They say exactly what we need to hear. Where Vivekananda says, "Stop seeking God. Seeking happens. You see, to seek, you have to assume you don't know or don't have, right? You have to assume something's missing. If you go seeking for God, you have to assume that He's not present in you. You have to assume that you and He are not one. And with all of that myriad of assumptions comes all of your myriad of troubles. So he says, just stop it. Stop looking for Him. Just simply sit and see Him. Become familiar with the knowledge that you've never seen, heard, tasted, smelled, or touched anything but the divine. Stop living in the world of separation caused by ego, the world of particularization, and pretend and assume that you're missing something that you have to go find for a future date, a non-existent future. The future is only assumed because you're in mind, and mind breaks everything into cause and effect. That's why they say realization is the one effect with no cause, because it's always present. It always is. It's outside of time. It does not fall into the dual throng of your active mind. And so our practice is to trust the beloved, to know that silence within that is before mind, that self, that is the self, that is the truth. And all the rest that happens with it is your own. You get that as a surprise. Because in active mind, when you think about a quiet mind, all you can think of is an idiot who can't do anything and sits there drooling. That's what the active mind, the ego, tells you is what the reality is if you stop thinking. But if you actually are able, through faith and grace, to cease this incessant thinking, this addiction to thought, you will become aware of so many things, so many myriad of unbelievable truths, literally unbelievable, become apparent to you. That which is becomes apparent. Take them both, Mother, and grant me only pure love for you. Here is your dharma, your adharma. Take them both, Mother, and grant me only pure love for you. To the Brahmo devotees, now listen to a song by Ram Prasad. Come, let us go for a walk, O mind, to Kali, that wish-fulfilling tree, and there beneath it gather the four fruits of life. Of your two wives, dispassion and worldliness, bring along dispassion only, and on your way to the tree, ask her son discrimination about the truth. So he's giving you the secret for how to still the mind, how to stop the outgoing mind. Your two wives, this is that duality that we're stuck in. Dispassion, right? Dispassion is the self needing nothing, the self knowing its wholeness, knowing its harmony, its unity, and worldliness, which is the self being identified by changing mind, by ideas and thoughts, by sensations coming in through the five senses. Bring along dispassion only. Leave behind the identity with the changing world. That's done. So go only with dispassion on your way to the tree, the wish-fulfilling tree. that tree which makes you whole, that tree which removes desire by giving you pure contentment, pure bliss, pure peace, that peace that passes understanding. And ask her son discrimination, right? And what is discrimination? Thakur tells us discrimination is looking for the unchanging alone, right? That which changes is not real. That which is unchanging alone is real. And what is unchanging? That part of you that is looking for the unchanging. That part of you that is looking for answers. That part of you that's going to temple. That part of you that's concerned about all of these things, right? And what a wonderful place to hide, right there in your very own self. What a great idea. You'll never you'll never think to look there. So ask her son discrimination about the truth, right? Ask about this truth. Now we talk about truth being that alignment between what's thought, what's said, and what's done, right? In that truth, when that aligns, then we have that inner integrity, and these things become much easier, right? That's because we don't have that alignment, we don't have that truth within, we don't have that alignment between those three things. That's the reason we can't just have our teacher whisper in our ear, "Thou art that," right? Because we're not in that alignment. We're very accustomed to thinking things that we're not going to act on. We're very accustomed to doing things that we'd rather not think about. You know, when we want to do something and when we know it's wrong, we silence that part of our part. We go into delusion. We push those ideas out of our head so that we can have our permission for our fun. We don't have to be bothered by that pesky conscience, right? But what is that conscience? That conscience is the real you. You see, in the end, that's the two birds in the tree. There's you and your conscience. And the conscience is sitting there, perfected, knowing what's right, knowing what's wrong, absolutely secure in itself. And then there's that other bird bouncing around, eating of all the different fruits in the tree. That's the ego self, living in the world of the changing, playing in the mind with all of its ideas and possibilities. And so we're trying to get that inner alignment, that inner integrity, which means we stop with the delusion, we stop hiding ourselves. You know, that's why the first thing Adam and Eve did after they ate that forbidden fruit, when they heard God, when they thought of God, they ran and hid because of shame, because of an inner discomfort that they didn't want to face. And they thought that the discomfort itself was the problem. And so they tried to run away from it, tried to hide from it, tried to ignore it, and to find the comfort for it in the world. And we all know the world, the only comfort the world gives is distraction. It can't fix anything. You know, yes, you can be depressed, and yes, you can go drink yourself under the table, and for the night you might forget. But when you wake up in the morning, not only will you remember the pain that you were trying to hide from, but now you've added to that pain from, you know, the shame of what you underwent and your lack of control and how you've given your authority to something else, to nothingness, and you're stuck. He says, when will you learn to lie, O mind, in the abode of blessedness, with cleanliness and defilement on either side of you? Only when you have found the way to keep these wives contentedly under a single roof will you behold the matchless form of Mother Shyama. So it's only when you are full of dispassion that both of these wives can live together, where you can, that's when you get to the roof and you realize the steps and the roof are made of the same substance. That's one of the surprise truths that you get when the mind silences. You realize those are just thoughts. Those are just thoughts. I am as complete without them as I am with them. You know, as long as I do not identify with them, there is no harm. It's when you identify with a thought that it becomes an attachment. It's when you identify with an idea that it becomes an attachment. It sticks to you. Why? Because you think it's you. You define yourself by it. So it doesn't go away. As a matter of fact, not only does it not go away, but it brings all its relatives, literally its relatives. All of the other thoughts that are related to that thought rise up and glom onto you together. So you get a whole gang of wrong thinkings hanging on to you, and you don't have the sense to get rid of them. You sit there being passed from one to the next as the fool at the party, right? Because you don't know that none of them are you, that they were meant to arise, show the beauty of God, and fall away again. They were meant to come, be witnessed, and released. But they come, you like them, you glom onto them, and you hold on to them and try desperately for them to be real. It means something to be rich. It means something to be beautiful. It means something to be smart. It means something to be independent. But you can't have any of those through thoughts. You can only have those when you realize you've always had those, that you are infinite intelligence. You are infinitely unique. You can't get more unique than one without a second. And so all that you've ever dreamed lies within the treasure chest of the immense silence, which is your nature within, pregnant with wisdom and with love. Ego and ignorance, your parents, right? They give birth to that sense of self, that small sense of idea. Ego and ignorance, your parents, instantly banish from your sight. Throw them away. Ego, that sense of separateness, that which is always looking and discerning. Put this one there, put that one there, break that into three, caused by the idea that the senses are presenting five aspects to you at any given time, when really the senses are only experiencing a unity, but by their nature they break it into pieces. They feed it to the mind, which then takes those pieces and places it around and produces a symbolic world in your mind in which you live, right? The world, we don't live in the world, we live in our mind. We talk about that way too much, but that's our situation. We've created a symbol for the world, for a world in our mind, and that's where we live. That's why all of us can be born and raised in the exact same circumstances and end up completely different from our siblings. How is that possible? We grew up in the same family. We grew up with the same parents. We went to the same schools. We we wore each other's clothes. And yet, when you grow up, you're radically different people. You see, if things really were the same in all of our minds, if the symbol of the world was actually the world, we would turn out the same. But it's not. We don't live in a world. We live in our own, in a symbol that we call the world. Banish ignorance and ego from your sight. And should delusion seek to drag you to its hole, right? If delusion, what is delusion? That is, we just talked about that. That's when you hide from what you know to be right in order to give yourself permission to express a desire, to grab onto something that's not helpful, for pleasure, for security, for strength, for whatever the reason, whatever it is that you think you lack, that makes you hide from your true nature so that you can have something you believe to be missing from yourself. That's delusion. And it drags you to a hole, right? It drags you into a bowl of thinking, right? Because we talked about all of those relative thoughts, all the relatives of your attachment that have come to join in with your attachment with their friend, their brother. They create a state of mind, which is a hole, and you can't see over the edge of it. It becomes your reality. That's how you can stand in the midst of all of this wonder and glory and say there is no God. Or where is God? Where is God? How you can stand in the midst of all of this and think that you know something, think that you've got something figured out. It's because you're living in a hole. You're living in that hole of delusion, where you have been dragged by your attachments, by your delusion. Manfully cling to the pillar of patience, right? Don't be dragged into a frenzy. This patience is giving, if you don't have this patience, the things that you're going to grab for solutions are going to be more wrong thinking, more wrong ideas from the place that you're sitting. So patience is that ability to let go, accept what is, take the values out of all of the things that you're clinging to, sit there quietly, patiently, tie to the post of unconcern the goats of vice and virtue. Oh my gosh, what a beautiful, beautiful secret this is. Because we always get caught up in our vices, especially once you start on the spiritual path, your vices become overwhelming because you start hanging out with people who don't seem quite as horrible as you are, and if you value vice and virtue, then you become a hypocrite because you're going to start hiding your vices so that you can appear virtuous, and you're spinning again, and now you've climbed into another hole. He says, be unconcerned with these things, know them to be the equal sides of the coin, and hold on to your discernment, because it will become obvious to you that you never desired your vices. You never wanted them, right? But you had convinced yourself, because you listened to all of the wrong thinking that was caused by your running after them in the first place. And you get stuck in that place. Tie to the post of unconcern the goats of vice and virtue, killing them with the sword of knowledge if they rebel. The knowledge of what? Your nature. Say again and again, I am ever free. I am ever blissful. I am not bound. I I am not this. I am not this. I am not this. I am not this. Right? That neti. Kill them with that truth. When you pull away and you realize that your mind, the thoughts of your mind in reality, this is a hard pill to swallow. The thoughts of your mind in reality have nothing to do with you. They cannot touch you. They cannot add anything to you, take away anything from you. They cannot hurt you. They cannot harm you. They can do nothing for you. And when you come to know that, the interest wanes. And when the interest begins to wane, the silence becomes more and more pronounced. You become more and more aware of this stillness that you never ever had any idea of before. Because the mind, the active mind, always runs after change. It cannot hear the self. It cannot find the refuge within, because it's looking for something that flickers, for something that changes, for something that moves, for something that's familiar to it. Familiar to what? It is you. So it's the ego positioning itself for the search. Let's go find that inner peace. Let's go find it. Oh, give me a minute. I'll rummage through here. I'll find it in a second. Just a minute. And on you go. And now you've got a new delusion. It's one that's taking you toward the light, little by little, but it's not necessary, right? It's not necessary. With the children of worldliness, your first wife, plead from a goodly distance. And if they will not listen, drown them in wisdom's sea. Renounce. Some of our habits are so deep and such a matter of habit that regardless of how much we know that they don't fulfill us, regardless of how much we know that they hurt us every time, this is the alcoholic syndrome, addiction, that no matter how much knowledge you have, you just can't seem to help yourself. If it comes to that, if you've pleaded and they will not listen, kill them, drown them in wisdom's sea, renounce them just out of no longer reasoning with them, no longer talking with them, just boom. And as soon as any of those thoughts arise, and this is important, because you can't do this when you're really caught up in the mind, in the changing mind. You can't do this. But with that silent self, once you become more aware of that inner self, when you become more aware of your nature, then you can see these children before they become children. You can see these thoughts coming when they're just a spark before they become a fire. And at that point, renunciation is very easy, you see, but we don't start renouncing until the thought is fully born and has already started to gather his friends. And then we've sat there and we've already thought about the last times we've done it, and we get caught in the past and living in that past idea of how much fun that was, what we did last time. You've left the presence. You've left the divine. You've stepped into the changing. You can't do that. You can't renounce with full-grown children. You have to you have to renounce before these children are born, before that spark has become a reality to you. And so this is why we practice, is to come closer and closer to that space, because the closer we come to that stillness, the more peace that we find there, it becomes its own thing. You've hoisted the sail, right? And Mother is taking you with grace. The winds of grace are moving you more and more in that direction. And the more and more, the closer and closer you come to that stillness within, the more you begin to experience aspects of it. Then the more silent the mind becomes. And in that silence that begins to develop, you hear things happen before they happen. You can hear because it's silent. There's not a whole cacophony of things going on that prevent you from being aware. And so you become aware of awareness. And in that awareness of awareness lives the guru. That awareness of awareness is the inner guru. And that bringing things into that awareness is all that's necessary. Nothing else is necessary. If you put the light of awareness on these things, they will untie their story themselves and resign, right? That's a promise from the beloved. If they will not listen, drown them in wisdom's sea, says Ram Prasad. If you do as I say, you can submit a good account, O mind, to the king of death, and I shall be well pleased with you and call you my darling. Yes. A good account, right? A good account. And that there is another key, right? That who is it that gives the good account? It's the conscience itself, right? Without the good account, that conscience will not let you be free. It won't let you lay down these things, right? Without a knowledge of grace. And what is that grace? Grace is the silence that passes understanding within, that becomes ever more apparent to us as we grow, as we begin listening. Why shouldn't one be able to realize God in this world? Why do you tell yourself you can't do it? Why do you tell yourself it's far away? It's many lifetimes. Oh, in my next lifetime, right? And in doing so, you give the mind permission to play and you give delusion its power over you. And you've created this sense of other within you that you cannot defeat. That's what the demons, that's what Mother is wearing, the heads around her neck, right? Those heads are all your demons, all of the things you thought that you could not overcome. She has killed them for you, through your calling on her name, through you not losing your way, but calling out continually, Mother, 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 Mother. And again, the closer you got and the more quiet things became, the more you understood she is everything you have ever wanted. And all of the objects were only reflecting a name, reflecting an idea of that stillness, reflecting an idea, an aspect of God. And that's part of discernment, to look at your desires closely and objectively until you see the name of God that is hidden in them. That name of God is what you're chasing, not the object. You're chasing the reflection. So be diligent. Be fearless and be relentless in that discernment. Why shouldn't one be able to realize God in this world? King Janaka had such realization. Ram Prasad described the world as a mere framework of illusion. Just know, all of this, it's only thinking. Everything that you're dealing with is only a thought. What is a thought that you can't overcome it? It is nothing. It's a wave in the stillness of the mind. That's all. Everything you've ever seen, heard, tasted, touched, or smelled was only a thought. Even those activities themselves are only thoughts. Right? They are not real. He described this as a mere framework of illusion. But if one loves God's hallowed feet, then this very world is a mansion of mirth. Your very self, in this resignation of ego, within the stillness, you find that you're sitting in an ocean of love. You're sitting in an ocean of wisdom. You're sitting in the ocean of immortality. This is the nature of you. The very world is a mansion of mirth. Here I can eat, here drink, and make merry. Janaka's might was unsurpassed. What did he lack of the world or the spirit? Holding to one as well the other, he drank his milk from a brimming cup, because he was no longer endangered by the world, because he didn't believe it. He didn't need it. And because he didn't need it, he could not be entangled or trapped by it. Knowing his nature, knowing his contentment, having tasted the bliss of being, he knew the body was only the mode of the sentence of his vices against him. Knowing this and being free from the wiles of the world, he danced and sang, made merry, and drank from a brimming cup, meaning he had everything he wanted and needed in himself. Right? Everyone laughs. But one cannot be King Janaka all of a sudden. Janaka at first practiced much austerity in solitude. Austerity is simply working your willpower. Austerity is working your willpower. It's like going to the willpower gym, right? You take a cold shower. Why? Because God cares deeply about cold showers? Not at all. Because it helps you to pull yourself from your attachment to a warm shower. It helps you strengthen and to pull yourself back and to realize it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This is not what I seek. This is not what I want. So we practice our austerity, our discipline, so that we can strengthen our willpower, so that we can discern even when we don't want to discern, so that we can renounce even though we're not quite sure we're fully on board with renouncing. We work to the point where we know there is only one person in this body. There is no war to fight until you share your sentience with a thought or a mind, something in the mind. When you share your sentience with something in the mind, you think you have to argue with yourself, right? Isn't that a funny thing? You'll sit there, you'll want to have an ice cream, but you're already 40 pounds overweight. You know you shouldn't have the ice cream. So you sit there and you argue. Well, what are you arguing with? There's only you in there. There's no one else, nothing else. But you have split yourself in two because of ego, and you've shared your sentience with an attachment. That's what attachment is. When you share a part of your sentience with an idea or a thought. And once you've done that, that thought or that idea seems to have its own will, seems to have its own strength. And then you have to go to battle with it. But it's a battle you're going to lose. Why? Because the only reason we split our sentience with a thought is so that we can lose to it. Right? Through discernment, we know I am one without a second in here. If I say I'm not going to have that piece of cake, do not bring the offer again to me. Do not. And when you know that you are that you have this sort of truth, when you have that alignment between what you think, what you say, and what you do, that thought will not arise again. It's only when it knows and when you know that there's a chance you're going to give in, and your memory of the pleasure becomes your goal. So in a very odd way, you live backwards because it's the past you're chasing. The memory of a pleasure which invites you into your vice is running after something that does not exist. It's a memory. It's already past and gone. And you're running backwards. You're going and trying to grab something unreal to give it life again. And you'll lose because you set it up to lose. But when you know that's why Mother says that the thread can't go through the needle if there's even a fiber sticking out, right? That fiber is what? It's your being untrue to yourself, you lying to yourself so that you can enjoy your vice, so that you can have what you think you want, right? So these are very important teachings, all of them clues to something that is right there before you, something that is obvious as the daylight. Even if one lives in the world, one must go into solitude now and then. You must. Why? Because the objects of the world that you've created will keep the noise going. Your habits will continue to churn. Your perspectives will remain the same. You won't see the truth of things. You'll see what your mind tells you about things. And if they agree with your attachments, you'll believe them. If they don't agree with your attachments, you'll argue with them, right? So we go into silence every now and then, where the things of the world cannot juggle our attachments and aversions, where the objects of the world can't can't share our sentience for just a day or two, to sit there in solitude and quiet without the things that we've gathered from this changing world, the pretend things that we've identified with. We set them down for just a short time to go into solitude every now and then. It will be of great help to a person if he goes away from his family, lives alone, and weeps for God even for 3 days. Right? Even for 3 days. Meaning any effort is great. Any effort is wonderful. If you can only do an afternoon, well, do at least your afternoon. And don't feel guilty that you couldn't do a day. That just drags you back into the mind, back into the changing, right? Do what you can and be content with that and think of God. And your whole battle, we learned from Brother Lawrence, the whole battle just happens in this moment. You don't have to do anything for the rest of your life. Just do it in this moment. That's enough. When your mind starts playing that game of like, oh my God, I can't give up chocolate cake for the rest of my life. Oh my Lord. Well, you've made something. You've gone and looked at a future which doesn't exist. It's only a concept in your mind. The future is not here. All you have ever experienced is a here and now. That's all you've ever experienced. How can there be a future if all you have ever experienced is now? How can there be a past if all you have ever experienced is a now? You see, past and future only exist when the ego exists, because the ego drags you. It's your identity in the changing mind. And in the changing mind, there is the concept of a past and the concept of a future, a concept of cause and a concept of effect, a concept of attraction and a concept of aversion. But within you, you know nothing of those things. You only know now because there's never been anything but now in your life, ever. Even if he thinks of God for 1 day in solitude, when he has the leisure, that too will do him good, right? Mother's just saying, any effort you make, no matter how small it is going to be helpful. So don't think that you have to be a hero, because what is it in you that wants to be a hero? The ego. And why does the ego want you to be a hero? Because the ego tells you it can make you a hero. But can the ego make you a hero? Can the ego do anything for you but make you feel small and unaccomplished? Right? Bury it. Drown it in the ocean of wisdom. People shed a whole jug of tears for wife and children, but who cries for the Lord? Now and then one must go into solitude and practice spiritual discipline to realize God, to find the beloved within, to realize why do they always say realize? They never say attain, they say realize. It's because this truth, this silent space is within you this very moment. There's nowhere to go for it. There's nothing more to learn for it. There's nothing else you have to read for it. It's always been yours. It is this moment itself. It has never left you, right? The only way to leave the moment is to go into your delusion, to stop thinking about the moment, to stop being aware of the moment. Go into your past and pick up all of the old days. Go into the future and pick up all the things that might be. Both of them will make you blind to what you are, to what is. Simply be. See everything, resist nothing. Watch it all come and go. Resist nothing, but don't grab on to anything. Let it rise in the mind, and if you don't use those two fingers, me and mine, it will pass away. Your greatest desire, the one you have always lost to, if you allow it to arise and you don't reach out to grab it, it will pass just as easily. That's its nature, to come, present, and go. Right? So just allow that. Accept everything. That's patience. That's fortitude. Accept what the moment is. Use faith to determine that it is perfect. Because what is it in its essence? It is your beloved. It is God. Not even in its essence. The moment is your beloved. Present is your beloved. If you don't hold on to the present alone, the past will define it to something different, and the future will use it for something different. But it is your peace. It is your bliss. It is your beloved. It is mother. It is father. Living in the world and entangled in many of its duties, the aspirant, during the first stage of spiritual life, finds many obstacles in the path of concentration because of attachments, right? Things come up and they just grab you, and you're so accustomed to grabbing things, you're so accustomed to thinking about these things in a particular way that it's just habit. You haven't broken the habit because you haven't become aware of it as a habit. You haven't seen that it's a habit. You've always accepted it as the way things are. While the trees on the footpath are young, they must be fenced around, right? So this is why you put yourself in holy company. This is why you have a particular room and place and time to sit to do your spiritual practice. You have something that's separate from the things that grab you, things that have deluded you. So while the tree is on the footpath, while they're young, they should be fenced around with your practice, fenced around with you just trying to create spaces. You don't go into those areas. You know, I remember, this is a silly example, but I remember one time Swami went away to India and I was left alone in the monastery because I was the only brahmachari. And so I went out and had a cup of coffee down on Polk Street at the corner of Polk and California, which is one of the most fascinating intersections in San Francisco. The weirdest people in the world walk by that corner. And the coffee house there has windows on two sides, so you can see everything. So I went there and was having a cup of coffee, and one of the nuns walked by, and she saw me, and I saw her, and we waved, and that was nothing. But it turns out when when Swami got back, she couldn't wait to tell him. She went to and told him that while he was away, Brahmachari Vance had gone out to the cafe on Polk Street. So Swami called me into his office, and he sat me down, and he says, "See, I hear that you had gone to get coffee when I was in India." "Oh yes, Maharaj, I was out for a walk. I just thought I would have a coffee." Hmm. See, this is not our ideal. He says it is not wrong to have coffee, but it's not what a monk is interested in. And he says, you see, if we need to go out to eat when we're traveling or if there's nothing available, no worries, go and get something to eat. He says, but the ideal of the monk is self-sufficiency. And if you go into that cafe, who knows what samskara that will awaken? Who knows what thought pattern that will awaken? Who knows what you will expose yourself to from your old mind, from your old way of thinking? And it may be just that one thing that was necessary for your fall, right? So he says, do not do these things when they are not necessary. And so it's that kind of life. That's how we keep the fence around ourselves. That's why we discipline ourselves. And of course, almost everybody in the world would be like, a cup of coffee? Who cares about a cup of coffee? That's no big deal at all. But you see, that's because we've accepted so much noise in our mind. We don't see that it's not about the cup of coffee, that it's about putting yourself in the midst of an old pattern that can awaken in the mind, an old habit that may not have arisen for a long time, that you don't have a defense for. Some beautiful person walks into the cafe and comes over and sits at your table. Some old friend who you used to do things with comes over and invites you to come over, or to go out or to meet again. You don't know. So you put this fence around you. But it's not the ideal to have a fence around you. So don't say that religion means everybody walking around with fences around themselves, that religious people are judging everyone and won't go here and won't go there and won't talk to this and won't play with that. That's not the case. It's for the children of religion, those of us who are practicing and are in the first stages, that we put up these fences around ourselves. The ideal is one without a second. Vivekananda he says, when I was a young man in my 20s, I would cross the road when I passed a theater. He says, but now I could live in the same room with a prostitute and see only the Divine Mother. That's the goal, right? In the end, we will be able to love everybody. In the
Swami,
end, yes.
now I'm thinking I need to put up fences. What fences should I put? Like,
No. It's not the fences that are important. Just keep the mind on God in this moment and do whatever
oh,
is helpful for that.
maybe they would be helpful. I don't know. I was thinking of clothing when you talk about clothes.
Yes. Well, we all have our own thing.
Like
Whatever.
modest clothing.
What's that?
Modest clothing.
Yeah. Well, want modesty and let clothing reflect your modesty. Don't worry about modest clothing.
It
Worry
gets
about
really
modesty.
during a heat wave, it's tempting.
Well, there are ways of wearing cool clothing, that aren't immodest. That's not a problem. But don't. It's important not to get caught up in the stuff. The mind does things like that. It presents all of these pretend situations, these pretend circumstances that are reasons that it can't be done. But we're not talking about those things as things that need to be done. What we need to do is right now, right here in this moment, think of God. And if there's anything in your environment that's causing you to not do that, put it away. Turn off the television, you know, put down the magazine, put down the newspaper, whatever it is. Brother Lawrence was very good about that. He says, in every moment, if I was doing something that I shouldn't do, I stopped and I went to God. He says, I didn't chastise myself. I didn't give myself a hard time about it. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't identify myself with a bad person. I simply stopped doing it and thought of God. And he says, if a moment came that there was something I should be doing that I wasn't doing, I simply did it. I didn't feel bad about not having done it. I didn't hold myself accountable for how long it had been since I had done it. I simply, in that moment, did what was right, what I knew I needed to be doing. That's all we have to do. Don't make it about what you're going to do or what needs to be done. Stay present. Stay here, stay now, right? Don't make it a big thing. It's never a big thing. The moment always comes to you one thing at a time. Your obstacles come to you one at a time in the moment. Just keep going in the moment. That's all. This is our only problem here and now. Nothing bigger than that. So be careful, because the mind will make it about big things and tell you stories about how hard it is and how impossible it is.
Of course, you mentioned the one vice, television. I wish you wouldn't have mentioned it. I would go to bed a lot earlier.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is you can't go to the moon in one step. So if you just in the moment do what you know is right. That's all. If you're going to watch television, or if you find yourself, you know that you're just not going to not watch. Excuse me, my age is coming up. uh if you're watching television, you know you shouldn't be watching television, then watch it with mother. Sit there and put mother's picture on the table next to you, and what comes on the TV, talk to her about it, tell her about it. Do it with mother. Bring mother into your vices, and she is your awareness. She is your highest ideal. And little by little, that's what Thakur told Girish. Remember,
Yeah. Yep.
He never told Girish he had to stop drinking. Never told him that. He just said, every time you pick up a drink, offer it to mother first and thank her for what you think you're getting from it. He knew that was enough. That awareness, that ray of awareness will take care of the rest. You give mother, I started this whole ordeal of spiritual life with 2 minutes of meditation twice a day. 2 minutes. That was it. I sat down at my little shrine. It had a little purple hippo on it that I found, because at that time I didn't have deities or ideals. I just put a shrine down that had things that I liked on it. And I sat there and I just thought about God, whatever I thought that was. I didn't have any books at that point. I didn't have any, I wasn't in that. I just wanted a spiritual life, because I knew that I had come to the end of my rope in living the life in the way that I had. I could not, there was nothing else I could do for enjoyment. Oh my gosh, it's 8:07. And there was nothing else I could do. And so I simply started doing that twice a day for 2 minutes. And look what happens. Don't answer that question, because maybe nothing has happened. But that's the thing though. Start. It's never bigger than the moment. And in this moment, if you do what's right, wonderful. Dance and clap and offer it to mother as a flower. Say, oh, look, mother, here's a flower for you. I did the right thing don't be sarcastic about it either. That was always my temptation. Just give her the flower and take the next moment. And if you do the right thing again, give her another flower. That is a flower, each thing that you do. And just keep making offerings like that. And if you miss several of them, so what? Just do it now. Just do it now. And little by little, mother will bring you home.
Well,
Because
Swami, that's a very interesting concept of giving her the flowers. because it's a very positive mindset. Instead of like, oh, I had a cup of coffee or chocolate cake or tea. It's like, oh, mother, I like I mean, you're acknowledging what you did right instead of what you did wrong when you're offering mother.
That's very important. Now, ideally, we don't want to be identified with either, but it's very important in the beginning that we not identify ourselves with a bad person, that we not identify ourselves with a weak person, that we not identify ourselves as failures or falling or evil or this, that, or the other. That's very important in the beginning, and that habit will drop off in time. But it's one of the biggest reasons that we get caught in the hole, that we've been dragged into by our attachments, is because we start to believe, we forget that we are ever free, ever pure, beloved of God, immortal. We forget that and we begin to think, oh, I'm such a bad person. Oh, I'm so weak. Oh my God, I'll never be able to do this. And you have to be careful of thoughts like that because those are your story. And if you're telling the story, you will live that story. That's why Ramakrishna says, always repeat, I am ever free. I am pure. I am loved of God. I will realize the truth. I will find my highest ideal. You just go through that. You don't buy the lie. All right.
Is that particular affirmation written down somewhere?
It is. If you just look, I can find it for you. I'll send it to you. But it's look toward the last paragraph. Actually, if you just go through any of Vivekananda's lectures and just read the last paragraphs of his lectures, he loves to go to the moon in the last paragraph of his message of his lessons. It's delightful. So I'll look for it myself for you. But that's where you'll find it. All right. I'm way over time. Sorry if I'm holding anybody back. But...
Swami, please do a blog on affirmations.
All right. I'll do that tonight. That'll be today's vlog. All right.
Bye.
Jai Ma, Jai Thakur, Jai Swamiji.
Yes, Swamiji. Thank you so much, Swamiji.
Yes. Indeed. Thank you, Mother. Indeed.